Alright, so obviously it's time for the whole who would have thought 2 years ago that... Oh, this is War Thunder! Like, who would have thought 2 years ago that we... Damn. Yes, the Harrier jump jet is coming to War Thunder in all its VTOL thrust vectoring glory, and not just one either, but half the Harrier family. 2 for Britain and 2 for the US, a premium and a tech trade jet for each. If you're not excited for the new power update yet, there's something wrong with you. This video is brought to you by supporters like you. Thanks for helping me keep the lights on. So the Harrier, the world's first successful VTOL jet aircraft, in fact pretty much the quintessential VTOL until the F-35 came about, and a very interesting aircraft to talk about. So in today's video I want to go over a brief history of this incredible family of jets, talk about the variants we're getting in-game this update, and then move over to talking about what you might expect from the gameplay of these vehicles when you get your hands on them. There are some things, some aspects of this aircraft that I think a lot of people are going to misinterpret that are important to talk about, but of course I will cover all of that in more detail when the aircraft is released and we can play it. So in the late 1950s, the British company Bristol developed the Pegasus thrust vectoring turbofan engine. A revolutionary innovation, the Pegasus used 4 swiveling exhaust nozzles which could rotate 90 degrees to point either rearwards or downwards. What this meant was that an aircraft using these engines could take off and land vertically, or at the very least, with a very short runway. Perfect for less idealistic conditions where air support was still very important, but more conventional platforms could not be used. Hawker, the same company behind the Hurricane, Tempest and the Hunter, began to work very closely with Bristol to produce an aircraft based on this engine and this capability, with first a subsonic aircraft designated P1127 being prototyped, as well as a supersonic counterpart that was later scrapped. The subsonic prototype would go on to be named Kestrel by the British, and the platform also garnered the interest of other nations such as the United States. In fact, most NATO nations were quite keen on the prospect. The Royal Air Force were impressed with the Kestrel design and ordered 6 pre-production aircraft, which first flew under the new name Harrier GR1 in the mid to late 1960s and entered formal service with the RAF in April of 1969. They were quickly deployed to West Germany, where they were seen as an important deterrent against advancing armour from the Soviet-controlled Eastern Bloc, as they could deploy quickly from very small and protected bases that couldn't field conventional attack aircraft. The Harrier saw its main use, of course, in the 1982 Falklands War, where it proved an ideal strike platform for close air support missions, aiding ground troops and importantly engaging Argentine artillery positions forward of the land force. It was in this conflict that the Harrier garnered its well-respected reputation and showed the enormous potential a VTOL strike aircraft could have, as the Harrier GR3 and more fighter-focused Sea Harrier FRS-1 operated by the Royal Navy were instrumental in Britain's retaking of the islands. US company McDonnell Douglas also took delivery of a number of Harriers for the United States Marine Corps, which served under the designation AV-8. However, these never saw combat before being phased out for the Harrier II, which is also the variant used by the Italian Navy, so no Italian Harriers in War Thunder just yet. So how Gaijin has chosen to implement the Harrier this update, which is actually fantastic, is that both nations, Britain and America, will get their initial variant as a premium, and then a later modification in the tech tree. No pay to win here. For Britain, we're looking at the Harrier GR1 as a Golden Eagle premium in rank 5, which is kind of odd to put such an aircraft in rank 5 rather than 6. It's obviously only been done so that Gaijin can say, hey, we don't sell top tier premiums. But then you're going to get the GR3 variant in the British tech trade, most likely preceding the Jaguar. The Harrier GR3 does make a significant improvement over the engines of the GR1, making it much better in acceleration and more responsive in VTOL mode. However, keep in mind that, like all variants of the Harrier, these are both going to be subsonic aircraft. One thing I'm very keen to know is whether or not the GR3 model will have access to flares, as it was outfitted with them for the Falklands War. As for the US variant, you'll get the AV-8A as a store pack premium, which at the moment you can't pre-order, however I assume that will change. If it does, I'll pin a comment below. And the AV-8A is basically a copy-paste GR3 with the upgraded Pegasus engine. You'll then get the AV-8C and the tech tree, presumably succeeding the current attackers, as That's what the A is for in AV8. As far as the dev server went, the footage of which you've been seeing in the background of this video, only the GR1 variant, which is the British GE Premium, was actually available. And there were several other vehicles not present on this iteration. The T-90A, for example, as well as the Russian Yak-38, which is their VTOL jet counterpart to the Harrier, and definitely worth talking about when we can get our hands on it. But the GR1 on the dev server was actually using the SRAM missiles from the Hunter F6, which reportedly it was tested with, at least according to somebody in today's livestream, but I've never seen anything to suggest that, so potentially that is a placeholder weapon system. The later variants of the Harrier 2, the GR7 and the GR9 did carry ASRAMs, as did the Sea Harrier FA2. These are the missiles developed from the SRAM, which the Tornado and Typhoon also used. But from what I've been able to tell, the Hunter F6 was the only aircraft to ever carry the SRAM, specifically serial number XG210. It fired 8 missiles in 1977 before the program was dropped in favour of just using the AIM-9L instead. So I'm not entirely sure what a Harrier is doing with them, but we'll have to see what happens come live patch release. If a Harrier GR1 did carry SRAMs, then great, but that doesn't exactly help us to work out what armaments the remaining Harriers will be outfitted with, as the GR3 and the US Harriers historically started out with the AIM-9L, which is the missile you find on certain US helicopters. This is the first all-aspect variant of the Sidewinder. Realistically, it has a 32G overload, though it's only been modelled with 20 in-game. But if the Harriers and potentially the F-104S Starfighter were given these missiles beyond what our current top-end fighters have, which they did use, they'd be quite competitive aircraft, despite suffering from lackluster performance compared to an F-4E or MiG-21 BIS, for example, and not being overly competitive for their time in real life. See, the thing is, Harriers weren't fighter aircraft. Outside of the Royal Navy's Sea Harriers, they weren't designed with this role in mind, and certainly were never proficient at it when stacked up against dedicated fighter aircraft of the time, such as the F-14 Tomcat or MiG-29. But if these aircraft were the first and at the moment only aircraft in War Thunder to get all-aspect heat-seeking missiles, we'd kind of be guided into the realms of eventually rank 7 jets like those I just mentioned, while for the moment they'd be quite competitive top-tier fighters, given that the fighters themselves haven't caught up in weaponry yet. I've spent a while talking about what the Harriers aren't in this video, but so far I haven't really talked about what they are, and that's where things get really interesting. See, the main benefit to the Harrier is its ability to be fielded in situations where no other fixed-wing aircraft can. In scenarios where other options are viable, the Harriers almost always lose out. Comparing the British Harriers to the Jaguar, for example, the Jaguar is a faster aircraft with more bombs and a ballistic computer, something the Harrier GR1 didn't have on the dev server, not sure about the GR3. Historically, this wasn't a factor. The Harrier was the only fixed-wing aircraft the British had for the vast majority of the conflict, and so it was the best aircraft Britain had for the conflict. It's kind of like when your mum says that you're her favourite child, but you're an only child. In the roles of air combat or close air support of ground assets, the Harriers were never the best in class, but when their superiors need a conventional airfield or a full-size supercarrier just to be launched, and your forces don't have access to either, a VTOL-capable jet starts to look a lot more impressive than, well, nothing. Even the more fighter-focused Sea Harrier was only so well liked because it was usable in situations where there were no other alternatives. If there were, that's what would have been used. The thing is, when it comes to War Thunder gameplay, we don't have restrictions on what aircraft can be used. In fact, even in World War II naval maps with no airfields, only Yorktown-class aircraft carriers, you'll still see B-17s and P-47s being played. And when it comes to combined arms battles, why would you take a Harrier over a Jaguar, which is superior in practically every regard? Besides the rule of cool, that is. Unlike the British forces in the Falklands or the United States Marine Corps, we're not restricted on what we can take out. So the main benefit of the Harrier, which is its convenience and its usability when other aircraft couldn't be launched, is gone. They are slow aircraft, they are not overly manoeuvrable, with a relatively low carrying capacity. None of them even got a radar until the later variants of the Sea Harrier and the Harrier 2. This isn't sounding like a favourable comparison. Now all of this is sounding fairly negative, and the Harriers themselves and their VTOL, we've barely even touched on that aspect, will potentially be more gimmicks and interesting vehicles to play rather than truly competitive ones. That shouldn't stop you playing them if you want them, but it may prevent you wanting to buy them. As for the VTOL ability itself, this is another factor that is great IRL, not only for the reasons we've just talked about, but Harrier bases could be set up far closer to a battlefield, allowing for quicker turnaround time and lower fuel consumption than conventional fighters and attackers. In War Thunder though, where none of that is a factor, even when you are using the Harrier, you'll almost be better off using it as a conventional aircraft in most situations. VTOL will be a bit of a gimmick. Yes, you have the ability to go straight up, but you will do that faster by taking off and climbing conventionally. Yes, you can land on a dime, and if there were maps at top tier where the only bases were carriers or heli bases, then this would be quite a useful aspect. But there aren't. Just land conventionally, it'll be easier, faster, and less likely to result in a crash. And finally, yes, you can land on helicopter bases rather than having to go back to the main airfield to rearm and repair, and this may be the best benefit the Harrier brings to the table, that fast turnaround. Is it worth sacrificing what a Jaguar GR1 brings to the table though? Possibly? Probably not. This will depend on various factors. If you don't know, spawning in aircraft of the same type in combined arms battles causes their spawn point cost to stack, meaning that your second fighter, even if it's a completely different aircraft to the first one, will cost you some 1100 spawn points to spawn in. If the Harriers are counted as attackers however, they won't double up in SP cost, meaning I'll be able to bring out both my Phantom FGR2 and Harrier in the same battle, for only around 1200 spawn points for both, not 1700 as it would cost me to bring out the Phantom and the Jaguar. Meanwhile, if the Harrier GR1 stays at the 9.7 BR it had on the dev server, and remember guys, dev server subject to change, especially battle ratings, but this would put it alongside the Challenger 1s, while the Jaguar sits above them at 10.0, and this would potentially allow the GR1 to be useful enough to buy if the tech tree GR3 also gets a higher BR like 10.0, which I assume it will. As for the US Harriers, same goes for them. If they're counted as attackers, which they certainly should be, they'll have a use in ground battles, as the US don't actually have an attacker counterpart like the Jaguar at that BR. However, if/when they do get an A6 or an A7, the Harriers aren't really going to be that useful, unless we get maps where there are no conventional airfields. As for using the Harriers in dogfights, the whole idea of using thrust vectoring to get a tighter turning circle is of a limited usefulness. Sure, you might tighten up one turn, but you're just draining yourself of a huge amount of energy and you're going to die. Once you're already in a stall fight with an enemy, you have a pretty great advantage there, but why would anybody stall fight a plane that effectively cannot stall? What Sea Harriers did in the Falklands War was sit in between canyons, where the Argentine Mirages and A4s couldn't engage them properly without smacking into the ground. And in Sim this might work too, but in ARB it's not really worth trying. All in all, I think the Harriers are going to be very, very interesting. I am hugely excited to try them out, and there are some more use cases I'd like to explore with them, but I don't really recommend buying them unless you're particularly a fan or you just want to collect them. The rule of cool means that I and many others will definitely play them in our lineups, no doubt about it, and enjoy them a lot as well, as you should. But if competitive play is what you're after, the Harriers don't really do anything that any other aircraft in game don't do better, besides looking damn cool. Even though I know these aren't going to be overly competitive aircraft, unless, like I said, they become the first aircraft with all aspect missiles, or we get some maps where only VTOL aircraft and helicopters can be used, the Harriers may still be my most anticipated part of the update. Sue me, I'm a sucker for a good gimmick. Anyway, I do hope you lads have enjoyed today's video. Shout out to everybody who came in and dropped in the dev server live stream. Definitely come follow me on Twitch, joining the next one. I do stream every Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday. You can ask me various questions, suggest vehicles, join in squads or events, and just generally have an awesome time. If you want to support the channel, then please consider checking out Pledstow. You can subscribe for as little as 10 cents a month. It really goes a long way. And aside from that, make sure you join the Discord, keep a whiskey to hand, keep your kilt on, and I'll catch you on the battlefield. Oh golly, that's a bit too sudden. There we go. 30 seconds. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Oh.